Hey guys, welcome back to the Rant. So today I decided I was going to talk about why I believe the Bible as a reliable document. Now, don't confuse what I'm saying for the idea that I'm going to try to prove my faith. That's about one of the dumbest things I can possibly do, because at the end of the day, either you think it makes sense or it doesn't. And I'm just here to explain today why I think it makes sense. Obviously, I'm a Christian. I've heard a lot of people talk about how they don't really think that the Bible's a reliable document because they think either the Bible was corrupted over time by people who changed the stories, or that the documents themselves just don't contain anything of historical value. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to address that today simply because I think that's a load of crap. So, in reference to whether or not the Bible has become corrupted over time, I'm going to refer to two things. The first one being traditions, and the second one being manuscripts, and I will explain what both of those are as we go along. So, back in ye olden days, like seriously, thousands of years ago, olden days, old, okay, the Bible was spread by word of mouth. Now, I don't mean like the whole Christian Bible, Old Testament. Old Testament was spread by word of mouth. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, if they just spread this by word of mouth, how do you know someone didn't change something along the way? Well, let me ask you something. Have you ever tried to retell the story of World War II and say that the Germans were the good guys? If you have a grandfather who was a veteran of World War II, I guarantee you wouldn't do that because he would slap you silly. What's wrong with you? You never met Hitler? This is an example of what I would call tradition. It's a sort of story that everybody knows, and if you mess with it, you're gonna get slapped around. As an example of this, go ahead and type in the comments below this video that the Batman's worst enemy is Reverse Flash. And the internet will eat you alive for saying that, because everybody just knows that's not true. That's just not true. See, everybody's gonna jump on you for saying that because everyone knows the Bat's worst enemy is the Joker, not the Reverse Flash. And this is another example of traditions. Stories that everybody just kind of knows, and you can't really mess with it because everyone already knows it. And for those of you that actually tried the Reverse Flash thing, I'm sorry. But your blood is on your hands now. Anyway, these traditions would basically drive the knowledge of what's standard in Jewish religious education and what's not. You have the stories and the religious ideas that everyone knows are trustworthy, and then you have the other stuff that, what is that? What is that? No. No, don't touch that. No, that's gross. So anyway, I've covered now to my own satisfaction the reliability of the Old Testament sources. However, I still need to cover the New Testament sources because that's kind of where most Christians get their theological ideas from. And that's where manuscripts come in. Manuscripts are from the time when memorization was on the decline, but the production of books was on the rise. With the Hellenization of the known world, it became very easy to traffic information by writing a book, then sending it to a prospective owner who would then copy the book. Then they would take the copy and keep it for themselves, and then send the book to the next recipient. They sent the original instead of the copy to make sure that the recipients only got the best, without typos, original document. Now, you're probably wondering, what is this? What does this have to do with anything? Get into that. So, with some historical digging and a little bit of a hunch, I would say that there was some confusion that came into the church between the years 300 and 600 regarding exegesis, which is basically Bible study and other things like that. And from this point on, the Catholic Church ran things with no questions asked from about 600 to 1600. And the only thing that broke that was the Protestant Reformation. Now, don't feel too bad, because the Roman Catholic Church made sure that everyone had copies of the Bible to read in the latest and greatest Latin, which no one could read, except for qualified church officials. Mostly because it wasn't the language everyone knew and loved and used, but also because the Catholic Church kind of told people they weren't allowed to read it. It was a bad time. Obviously, because of this, there's a lot of room for myths to grow. You might be thinking, well dang, with all this room for myths to grow, how do we know the books we have in our hands now, as far as the New Testament goes, are actually what was first written? Glad you asked that. See, if we take the manuscripts, which is the copies of the originals from the Roman Catholic era, and we take them and we compare them with those from the early Christian era, we have like a 98% match on the data. And the main difference is typos. Little stuff that you do it too. You do it too. Which in a courtroom would be a rock-solid alibi for corroboration of story, which would basically mean the story was not changed over time. Well, that accounts for whether or not it's possible for the books to have been changed over time, but now we still have to deal with whether or not what was written was actually historically accurate or not. Oh, this part's gonna be fun. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and address the Old Testament first, and I'm gonna take a pot shot at attempting to suggest the existence of one of the Old Testament's most famous leaders, most legendary leaders, most epic leaders, and either this will work or it won't. I know who you are, hard skeptics. You make me sad. So King David was allegedly one of Israel's most famous kings, leading up to one of Israel's most bountiful rules, as well as having performed feats allegedly that were so fantastic they just couldn't be true. The fact that his feats, people have argued, couldn't be true have led to the idea that David was an invented character who represented all of the collective awesomeness of the Israelite kings that actually did exist. However, I would like to point out that there are 3 non-Israelite artifacts from historical research that suggest that pagan nations recognized David as an actual king. And these are the Tel Dan stele, the Mesha stele, and the Shawshank relief. And basically, while these aren't concrete evidence, I think it's worth noting that in all 3 accounts, you have a pagan empire that doesn't really care one way or another how Israel's history is preserved and what their culture looks like, that's saying, oh yeah, Israel, that's where David is. That's David's house. There were other kings. Why did they use David if they didn't think he really lived there? That would kind of be like someone saying, oh, hey, look, it's Arkham Asylum. I know who's behind this. Captain Cold. You mean the Joker or Hugo Strange, right? Right? See, my big question is, why would you name someone that has nothing to do with what you're referencing? It's not. You don't. Why? Don't. No. And this brings me to the New Testament. And the main question in the New Testament is, Jesus? Was he really who you Christians say he was? And I would counter that with, well, let's see what Jesus' enemies had to say about him, because if it was all made up, someone's going to point it out. Let's start with the established religious order of Jerusalem. They didn't like him at all. The main religious sect during the times of Jesus was the Pharisaical order, and these guys basically tried to make sure everyone was following the Mosaic Law, and about 9,000 other laws that they made up! I don't literally mean 9,000. That's a joke. That it refers... You know what? Never mind. Well, these guys claimed that Jesus was tied to occult activity, and you can find this in the Gospels, but you can also find it in sources such as the Babylonian Talmud. If you read it, there's a story of a man saying that Jesus was going to be stoned about 40 days before he was arrested and executed for, quote, practicing sorcery and leading Israel into apostasy. The whole apostasy thing was about Jesus claiming that he was one with God the Father, who the Jewish people said there is no other God but him. And the witchcraft thing? Miracles. So basically, you have Jewish people that did not like what Jesus was doing, and instead of saying that Jesus did not do these things, they said, oh, he did them, but he did it through Satan. Okay, so that's one reference that says that Jesus was who he claimed he was, except he was on the wrong side of the fence. But now, what do the pagans have to say about him? Well, the Greco-Roman account is awesome. Let's go ahead and start there next. I'm going to start with Lucian. Lucian's a fun guy. Lucian was a satirical Greek historian. He basically hated Christians, and he said they worship a man to this day who introduced their novel rights to them and was crucified for them. Christians, he then said, believe that they are immortal for all time, they disregard death, and that they were atheists because they didn't worship the pagan pantheon of the Greco-Roman Empire. Along with this, Lucian also claimed that Christians only worshipped the crucified sage. He then goes on to say that they cared not for worldly goods and shared them as if they were all owned by the community, which is a story that can be corroborated in the book of Acts in the Christian Bible. Even the doomsday weather recorded at Christ's death in the Gospels is verified by Thallus, for whom there are only presently references to his writings. In 221 AD, a man who was a Christian named Julius Africanus, who was a historian, referred to Thallus' account of the strange solar activity. He says, quote, "On the whole world there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down. This darkness Thallus, in the third book of his history, calls, as appears to me without reason, an eclipse of the sun." This quote can be found in Chronography 18:1. Julius also refers to another historian who wrote a history called Chronicles, not to be confused with the Jewish history of the same name, also referring to the strange solar activity. Well, you know what? People say that history is written by the winners, but it sounds like the losers had a lot to say about the game today. Most of it's that what we have to say is true. So there you have it, guys. That's why I find the Bible to be a fairly reliable religious document as far as historical accuracy and whether or not it was corrupted by people changing it. There's still the question of canon that I haven't answered. How did certain books become a part of the collection? I half answered that, but I half didn't because it's complicated and I didn't really have the time or the energy to address that in this video. But if you'd like to see a video about that, let me know and I will do my best to compile something on the subject. If you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and you will get new videos whenever I make them, which is like, you know, once or twice a year. So I'm really sorry, guys. I'm trying to keep up, but video editing is weird and life is weird, and I'm doing my best. I appreciate your patience. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.